The 1930s, an era of groundbreaking cinema that forever changed the face of horror. From the chilling gothic tales to the sinister monsters that laid the foundation for the genre that we love, this truly is the golden age of horror and Hollywood. Welcome back to another top 10 list video, you guys. If you haven't checked out the first one, the 1920s top 10 horror films, make sure to go check that out, link up above. I really appreciate it. But for today, we're going to be talking about the top 10 1930s horror films. Before we hop into the list, I just want to say that this is a very, very tough era, meaning that there's tons of great films, so if one is left off, that doesn't mean it's not good. These are just my personal top 10 favorites, and this could also change within the future or tomorrow. But because it's so tough, I threw in a couple honorable mentions to help us, shed some light on some other films. As always, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe button, hit the bell for more notifications, leave a comment down below if you enjoyed, and what are your top 10 favorite 1930s horror films? I would love to know. Or an underrated one. Let me know that in the comment section below. And with that being said, let's hop right into it. So coming up with our first honorable mention, we have two of them by the way, is Vampire from 1932. This is one crazy gothic expressionist vampire film directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer. What makes Vampire really cool is its hypnotic atmosphere, the use of the light and shadow, and the innovative surrealist hypnotic storytelling of the vampire during this time. It's a really cool film. Without getting too much into it, highly recommend it, and you guys should check it out. And now coming in at our second honorable mention list is going to be Son of Frankenstein. And you might see this Blu-ray a little bit more throughout this video. But the reason why I can't throw 3 freaking Frankenstein films from the original series in one top 10 list is, come on, we gotta have some diversity, and that wouldn't be fair. But with that being said, those first 3 films are all fantastic. Great performance, especially in Son of Frankenstein, from not only Basil Rathbone, but also Igor, Bela Lugosi. Great stuff. Karloff's last film is actually playing the monster. Check it out. Amazing stuff. And now with those 2 great films for honorable mentions out of the way, let's dive straight into our top 10 list.
Zombie.
Now coming in at number 10 on our list is White Zombie. Once again, Bela Lugosi. And you might see his name pop up more than once. The movie takes place in Haiti, and it involves with a lot of the voodooism type of zombies, the early zombie folklore, not necessarily the George Romero flesh-eating zombies, so don't expect that. Basically like mind-controlled, in a dreamlike state people. Basically, Bela Lugosi is a wealthy landowner, and he has one of the coolest character names ever, Murder Legendre, who basically is taking women away from their fiance and using them for his own personal gain for his zombie collection, if you will. What makes this movie so special is because it came out in 1932, this is really the first ever zombie film. Upon its original release, critics were kind of harsh on the film, but what critics aren't harsh on horror films basically since the beginning of time. But it is now a well-renowned classic among the horror fans and cinema in general. It's in the public domain. You can watch it on YouTube for free. Very accessible to find. The film's eerie sound design and unsettling music cues add to its otherworldly dreamlike atmosphere and making it a must-watch for any horror fan. Check it out if you haven't seen it. White Zombie coming in at number 10. And yes, if you're wondering, is that where Rob Zombie got his original band name from? White Zombie? Yes, it was. He's a huge horror fan like us, so shout out Rob Zombie.
Well, what do you mean? Where is she?
Coming in at number 9, I unfortunately don't have the Blu-ray or physical copy to show you on screen, but The Black Cat from 1934. Wow, this might be the darkest movie on this list. This film has Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, torturism, Satanism, car crashes, blood, just like an insane amount of stuff for a 1930s horror film, especially from Universal. Great stuff. Bela Lugosi plays a psychiatrist, a former prisoner of war returning back to his home country of Hungary to seek revenge on Boris Karloff because of the wrongdoings that he did to his family, him in the war, and allowing him to become a prisoner of war. This is a dark background. Boris Karloff is a sadistic architect, occultist basically, who stole Lugosi's wife and his daughter, who eventually became his new companion, to lead him in a part of this cult that he's doing. This movie is weird, twisted, and bizarre for 1934. I mean, it is crazy. The revenge between the two is driven by psychological manipulation, jealousy, and revenge. You gotta check it out just for the acting duo of Bela Lugosi and Karloff going at each other this entire movie. It is fantastic. Check out The Black Cat from 1934. And yes, also, it's based off the Edgar Allan Poe story loosely. Alright you guys, now coming in at number 8 is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1931. And to your surprise, no, it's not a Universal Monster film. It's not produced by Universal Studios. It's actually produced by Paramount back in the day. Of course, it's based off the classic novel by Robert Louis Stevenson of the same name. Actually, I believe it's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But anyways, Frederick March does an absolutely beautiful job. Beautifully disturbing job. That's a good way to put it, portraying Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll. The transformation scenes may seem a little dated, but it's very impressive to see what all they were able to accomplish with it being in the early 30s and special effects being at its infancy. So really great stuff here by Paramount and Frederick March. I mean, this is the best version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that I have personally seen, in my personal opinion. There's a lot of versions out there since the story is pretty much public domain, so anybody can make one, but so far to me this is better than the Spencer Tracy version and than the multiple ones from the 1920s. The 1931 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the one to go with, in my personal opinion. We have great scenes of Mr. Hyde going out into the town and causing complete chaos. You know, he's beating people up, he's trying to seduce women. It's crazy. Especially, this is pre-Hays Code era Hollywood, so this one got away with a lot of stuff, and it's crazy to see that in 1931. So if you guys haven't seen any Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde film, or don't even know the story, basically it's about between good and evil, the duality of man, but based off the drug that Dr. Jekyll makes. It's like a potion. Drinks it, becomes Mr. Hyde. That's when you let your evil side out, basically. Go check it out. It's really, really fun. And if you haven't seen it yet and you're a horror fan, what are you doing? You've got to check that out.
Anyone who opens this casket.
Coming in at number 7 from 1932 is the classic Universal Monsters Studios production of The Mummy. Now, if you didn't know already, I've already reviewed every single Universal Monster film on my channel a couple of Octobers ago, all 31 films in fact. Go check that out. It's called Monstober, link up above, but I've already reviewed The Mummy, and if you haven't seen The Mummy yet and you're a horror fan, again, what are you doing? Basically, Boris Karloff plays an ancient Egyptian prince who's revived once his mummy is found, and he's looking for his long-lost love, Ankh-Senamen. Unlike a bunch of the other Universal Monster films that are based off novels and literature, they had pre-existing medias to help them guide them through the movie. This one does not. You know, this one is more original in that sense. Boris Karloff has a mesmerizing performance underneath all that makeup, and if you're expecting to see a mummy in bandages walk around this entire film and just kill people, you got the wrong movie. Those are the sequels. This one is mainly about Boris Karloff as Imhotep, his human ancient prince form, instead of the mummy, and him looking for his lost love. It's unfortunate we don't get to see him in bandages that much, but when we do, it's awesome. It also has a brutal backstory on how the mummy was killed and buried. Great stuff. If you haven't seen The Mummy from 1932, highly, highly recommend it. One of the best Universal Monster films of all time.
Amen. Lose life. I suppose it's a stall. Here we are, 6 people sitting around.
As we continue to move on along with our list, coming in at number 6, also from 1932, and also starring Boris Karloff, we have The Old Dark House. The movie takes place in Wales, and it's these 5 travelers that are going somewhere, but they just cannot make it to their destination because of this relentless storm that is just constantly pouring down. It's thunder, it's just, you don't want to be out driving in it. But they stumble upon an old mansion, and they seek shelter there, and they experience weird things throughout the night. When you think of haunted house films, this is one of them up there. Like, this is a golden standard, quintessential example of a haunted house film, especially with it being one of the first. There was actually some other stuff from the 1920s and 1910s with, some shorts of horror films back then. But along with House on Haunted Hill, they're up there for some of the best haunted house movies that you can ever, see. I mean, the name is The Old Dark House. That gives it away by itself. Boris Karloff is in this, like I said, but he is kind of typecasted in a way. Since this is a year after the original Frankenstein, he doesn't have a lot of speaking lines. He's like a mumbling brute with lots of grunts and other weird noises like that instead of actual speaking lines. So he's kind of giving like a Frankenstein performance in some sort of way, but not quite really. He portrays that, weird, brute guy in a way so good, and it's very haunting, especially in The Old Dark House. This film is also directed by the legendary James Whale, who we'll see later on in this list, of course, because he did wonders for Universal Studios. He is so perfect at capturing that gothic horror feel. He's one of the greatest directors from the 1930s, one of my personal favorites. Shout out to James Whale. Shout out to The Old Dark House. If you haven't seen it, once again, check it out. Check out all these movies.
How do you like that, eh?
Alright, you guys, we're cracking into the top 5, and this is hard for me because this might be my favorite Universal monster film. I always end up supporting this movie. When somebody asks, is it my favorite, I'd always go to The Invisible Man. I feel like it deserves more love, so that's why I'm going to talk about it for a little bit. Directed by James Whale, once again, released in 1933, The Invisible Man is groundbreaking, especially for its special effects, but also from the amazing performance of Claude Rains. As I previously mentioned, this one is based off a book by H.G. Wells of the same name, The Invisible Man, but it follows Dr. Jack Griffin, who begins experimenting on himself, and he finds a way to turn invisible, but he can't turn back. The drug psychologically messes with his mind, and he turns evil and wreaks havoc across his town. It's amazing. If you're looking for a good horror movie, old school horror movie with a high body count, dude, The Invisible Man, he runs a train off the track, he's killing people left and right, he's robbing banks. It's so cool and it's so fun. There's a lot of comedic aspects to this film too because of James Whale. He's awesome, and it's great funny moments that you can do with having an invisible character. It blows my mind to see how the special effects were done all the way back in 1933. It shocked audiences then, and it shocks them now because of how old this film is and how good it still looks. It still holds up to today. And shout out to Claude Rains, who gives an amazing performance. We don't really get to see his face until the very end, but all we get to hear is his voice, and his voice is very commanding. When you know who's talking, you know who that is. It's a fantastic performance. The Invisible Man from 1933 is a must watch. Alright, you guys, coming in at number 4, also from 1933, King Kong, in which, bro, we need a 4K of this, by the way, not a Blu-ray. We need a 4K of the original classic. Anyways, just how I said The Invisible Man was groundbreaking in 1933 for its special effects, King Kong takes it to a whole nother level. Not only does it have a great story, great actors, but what makes it so amazing is thanks to Willis O'Brien, who created the stop-motion effects for the film. He gave King Kong all sorts of different emotions and made him look human. He created the dinosaurs. They did all sorts of different innovative effects with moving backgrounds, splicing two films together. They went all out for this film, and it blew up Hollywood and cinema at the time. This film has inspired countless and countless and countless directors, filmmakers, actors, etc. because there was nothing like this at the time. And when it did, it blew up. Everybody still talks about it to this day. And if you haven't seen King Kong from 1933, once again, you know what I'm going to say. Go check it out. There's a big adventure and fantasy aspect to the film as the camera crew travels to Skull Island to look for the eighth wonder of the world, King Kong. And as they do so, they encounter dinosaurs, other giant monsters, insects, etc. You know, so that it really adds another layer to the film. Because not only is there the horror parts where King Kong breaks out going through the city, you know, killing people, the villagers as well, it puts you in this otherworldly perspective of natives of this island, of this god they worship, King Kong himself, and putting him in real world. There's tons of emotions and a deeper psychoanalysis that you could have on this film. But if you just want to check it out for what it is, the gold standard film that this is, check it out. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10. Alright you guys, now that we're cracking into the top 3, James Whale, once again, The Bride of Frankenstein. And this one, to be honest, could take that number 1 spot, but it's very deserving of 3 as well, 2 and 1. The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, like I said, once again directed by James Whale, pulls on the tragic events of the original, expands them, and makes it way more emotional and more human-like. While it blends gothic horror and dark humor, we have both this time Dr. Frankenstein and the new evil Dr. Pretorius creating the mate for the original monster to put him at peace. Boris Karloff is back and plays the monster again, as Elsa Lanchester plays the bride. Both performances are top-notch and outstanding. Both very emotional and strong. When the bride is created, she screams in shock and terror as she sees her husband, the monster, Boris Karloff, and freaks out. The monster freaks out, is scared, is sad. The castle blows up. It has a crazy ending. The Bride of Frankenstein is one of the best sequels, not just horror, but sequels in general of all time in cinema. It's one of the best horror films from the 1930s, and like I said, this easily could have taken the number 1 spot. Elsa also plays Mary Shelley in the beginning of the film as a prologue to basically explain the story of Frankenstein again. Wasn't necessarily like needed, but it's still pretty cool. So she has a dual acting role in that. I also want to point out again, Dr. Pretorius is way more sadistic and evil than Dr. Frankenstein. He's just an awesome character to introduce and does a fantastic, amazing job in this film. There are so many fantastic scenes from this film, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be where the Frankenstein's monster meets the old hermit. They have some food, they have a drink, they have a smoke. It's a great bonding scene, and it shows that no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, you can always meet a friend out there. And that's just some of the social cues this movie picks up. It's, in my opinion, James Whale's masterpiece. It's shot well, directed well, and even the music score, fantastic. Everything about The Bride of Frankenstein is just perfect. It's a movie that everybody should just see at least once in their life, in my personal opinion. There's nothing wrong about it. Like, I highly recommend it. I can't talk enough good about it. So please check out The Bride of Frankenstein, but we got 2 more picks left.
I am Dracula.
Okay, this is very tough for me for these 1 and 2 spots. Really, this whole list was. But coming in at number 2, we have the 1931 classic directed by Todd Browning, Dracula. And yes, it's also my shirt too. Dracula is a very, very, very impactful horror film. I highly recommend you check out my more in-depth review of it, link up above. It's also the first horror film that I ever saw, so it's a huge reason why I love all this. And the Universal Classic Monsters. It's the first ever talkie horror film. Bela Lugosi. Need I say more? Of course, it's based off the novel by Bram Stoker, and it follows it pretty well. It's not the most accurate, film adaptation, but Bela Lugosi plays Count Dracula, and he's one of the most iconic, performers, actors of all time, especially from this era. Any single time anybody ever does a Dracula impression, you're doing a Lugosi impression. He's so iconic, so impactful to the genre. Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing is really, really cool and funny. He just always has like smart remarks and tries to like, when you see it, you know what I'm talking about. But Dwight Fry is also fantastic too. His evil, sadistic laugh when he's under Dracula's control on the ship and in prison, it's great. I mean, it's over the top extra, but it's great. So as I said before, I've already reviewed all the Universal Monster films, so it might be easier for you to just go check out that film where it's more in depth and it's a lot of fun because it was during Halloween. But I love Dracula so much, just as many of other horror fans, and Bela Lugosi is one of my favorite actors. I highly, highly recommend Dracula from 1931. Coming in at the final #1 spot, also from 1931, we have Frankenstein, directed by James Whale. Once again, there's not much else to say about this film other than I'm sure you already know if you're watching this video. Fantastic performance by Colin Clive as Dr. Frankenstein, and of course Boris Karloff as the monster, with great supporting actors as well. Every single time I watch this film, I love and I'm immersed by the graveyard scenes where he's digging up the bodies, finding the body parts, and seeing the monster stumble out into the town. I love those every single time. It just adds to the film of like, why do I love this film? This is why. These parts right here. Instead of me talking about the plot, I'm just going to say why it's great and why I love it. Personally, like I said, Colin Clive is fan-freaking-tastic. I mean, the iconic scene, It's Alive, everybody knows that. Everybody in the world knows that when you're talking about Frankenstein or horror in general. The It's Alive quote is so memorable. The scene where Frankenstein backs up, where we first see him, backs up into the doorway and then turns around. It's silent. There's no music. It's so eerie, so creepy. It's amazing. I mean, Frankenstein from 1931 is an all-time classic, an all-time film classic. I mean, I'm sure everybody saw this one coming, but like, you know, I could have thrown Dracula up there, even Bride of Frankenstein, even King Kong or The Invisible Man. It's so interchangeable. The 1930s is such a great, amazing decade for horror. With that being said, I really hope you enjoyed my 1930s top 10 horror films list. Was there any films missing? I'm sure there was, because this is like I said, a tough decade. What films do you recommend? What films are your favorite? And if I was missing any films, let me know that in the comments below on what you think should have been on this list. Of course, I appreciate all the support you guys have given me, and I will continue to make content and videos. And hopefully if you like these lists, like the 1920s one and this one, I'll continue throughout the decades. They're a lot of fun to make, and I really appreciate all the support. If this is your first time finding the channel, I just want to say we do tons of live streams, live commentaries, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us so we can see you there. And so we can talk about more 1930s horror films, classic monsters, and yeah, I would love to see y'all there. Again, with all that being said, I appreciate all the support. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.